Hey, what's up, Jack? Thank you so much for joining me on my show. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, mate. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I want to get right into it. You've been really open about your journey from basically productizing yourself. I know your company has visualized value, and I'm going to let you talk about all that. But what I'm really interested in, at least the conversation to start off with, is that journey of yours. It sounds like from reading your words, but also from some assumptions that I've made by myself with some of that
Hmm.
experience. You get into the design work, you start freelancing, you're into the agency work. Next thing you know, there's 15, 20 clients. They're all nagging at you, breathing down your neck, and you say, you say to yourself, like, there's got to be a better way, right?
Hmm.
So please, with that opening, please just go with your journey and how you got on the road that you're on now.
Sure. So I'm probably close to a decade in at this point from my first, what is it now, 2020? Yeah, I graduated university in 2010 and had a opportunity to come out to New York with a few friends of mine. I went to school in the UK and actually just maybe a week before I took off, I was like, I should probably like send a few emails and see if there's anybody in New York I could link up with when I get out there in the graphic design world. I just graduated with a graphic design degree, so it felt
Mm,
like see what's going on across the pond in the world of graphic design, and just fired off 100 emails maybe to like Craigslist ads needing like graphic design help just to go in and speak to people.
mm.
And one guy got back to me. He's like, I like your work. Come in for an interview and we'll see if we can make this thing happen. And met up with him. He started a 5, 6 person little creative agency in the west side of Manhattan. And I met up with him. We had a chat. He liked my work. He's like, all right, let's do this officially. We'll get you the visa and stuff, get you over. And he's kind of my introduction to the design agency world, like a mix of massive clients, little clients, but it was very chaotic, totally chaotic as all agencies tend to be. And yeah, that was like pure play graphic design role. Loved the exposure to all the different problems early on in the career. I think that's like one of the fundamental things that's attractive about the agency world is like
Yeah,
different
I
problem
agree.
every day, different people to speak to, and
Hmm.
it's like really engaging early on in your career. So I hopped around maybe 7 or 8 uh, agency jobs over the course of the next 7 years. Worked in house at a brand that I'd worked with at an agency. Worked for a tech startup for a little while. Worked at Bloomberg for a year. Um, and yeah, about 7 years in, I was like, maybe I've got a good enough hand on this agency game that I could do it myself. A lot of that, I think, came from getting to a point in the journey where I'd started to get exposed to the financial side of the agency. So that was kind of shielded from me up until,
Sure.
you're in those conversations 5, 6 years in. Obviously depends on where you work, but that was my experience. And seeing like what they're charging for what we're doing, I was like instantly like, wow, the napkin math in my head. I was like, I'm getting paid this much and you're getting paid that much. And I know that the primary deliverable or a bunch of the value is in the stuff that I'm producing. So arrogantly, I was like, I'm going to do this by myself. Right. So I bounced out, got the LLC set up, had a conversation with an old account manager at an old agency who referred me to a client of theirs that was leaving them because they were too expensive. They're like working with an 11,000 person agency, and total long shot. He's like, let me do an intro to you and see if they're interested. Right. So I put the pitch deck together and all this stuff, managed to win that business. It's a big car manufacturer, and it was all sorts of stuff. I was like shooting ads, writing emails, building web pages, doing everything. And I'd kind of set the expectation that we were an alternative to this massive agency. So their expectation was like, we can email you whenever we want. We could call you whenever we want. If we need a project doing by this afternoon, you're our guy, right?
You're the
So
guy.
that was yeah, 3 to 6 months of just like complete carnage, like trying to maintain the illusion that it was just like a corporate agency.
Yeah.
And it was just totally nuts, man, like 18-hour days, etc., etc. Then like kind of went the opposite direction, stayed in the agency game, still doing a bit of work for them. But like after that, like initial storm calmed down, it was like, let's work with smaller businesses. Maybe we're going to have a better run at this. And I say we, it's me at this point, have better run at serving smaller businesses because, you know, they're more empathetic to our size and all of that kind of stuff. But, you know, same scenario, maybe even worse, honestly, because they have more skin in the game and their expectations are higher. And if you aren't available every second of the day, it's like there's always a house on fire, right? If there's a term a friend of mine always used to use, it's called the savior CMO. It's like if you work with a really small business and you're like on the hook for marketing, so much of the growth of the company is like that responsibility is kind of transferred over to you. A lot of people have the expectation that marketing is going to fix every problem in their business. And as you probably know as well, there's a couple other things you have to have in order for that for marketing to be as effective as it can be. So again, just going through like these, like solving different problems, getting acquainted with different teams, like skilling up in different areas, hiring different freelancers, and just carnage basically. And I think at one point we just decided like the only way to grow this is to hire more people, right? The only way to get this past, like in its current form, the way we're winning business and the types of people that are approaching us, the only way to do it is to hire like more people that can fulfill on the project management side, on the creative side, on the strategy side. And I just was not really interested in that, honestly. It wasn't even a case of not believing that would solve the problem. I think it would to some extent. It would
It's
keep
just a whole
the
new
business
set of
running.
problems.
Yeah, it's just a whole, yeah, exactly right. Like managing people, being responsible for people, like asking people to care about this thing as much as you care about it. It's just like a really, if you're not completely invested in every problem, I think that, like you said, just presents a whole nother set of issues that I didn't necessarily have the skill set to solve either, and didn't have the desire to build the skill set to solve. So, yeah, this was maybe 18 months in at this point, just trying all these different models and pivoting to like, let's exclusively work with these types of people. Like at one point I was like, let's just work with recruiters and do, because I had experience at a recruiting startup, let's build a set of deliverables specific for that. And turns out I was not interested in the problem, so it wasn't a great use of time. And then just eventually stumbled on this idea, like completely burned out at this point, and read the if you read the Naval tweet storm, How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky.
I've read about half of it. It was way longer than I thought it was going to be when I started reading it. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I got about halfway through.
Yeah, I just like, it was like this serendipitous thing of like I was marketing on, I think, Facebook at the time. I was in this like pretty insular marketing environment. And then like I'd somehow found my way onto Twitter and I started reading this thing. I'm like, wow, there's some like really interesting ideas in here. And I think that like connected a few neurons that had been drifting too far apart for a long time. And it was like, you know, look for something that, you know, you do better than anybody else, and, you know, build a recognizable body of work that starts to create demand as opposed to just constantly responding to whatever anybody emails you, right?
Sure.
And then just retroactively looking back at the type of work I'd done, the clients, or the common like strengths in all the work I'd done in the past. I think having that agency background, a lot of the stuff that I was drawn to in my agency career was like working on the pitch material. So all the documents that would sell the work in to the client, like articulating strategy and like, this is your market share. These are, you know, these are the things that we need to do in order to move you from this place to this place. It's like putting visual, like articulating abstract ideas visually in order to sell agency services. That was kind of obviously not what we were selling. It was what we were using to sell them a deliverable. But
you were good at presenting it.
Yeah. So I got to that point where I was like, yeah, there's value in this. And even in my last couple of agency jobs, that was kind of, you know, my role was just show up, win the work, come back, build the next pitch, win the next piece of work, and then hand the work off to somebody else. And it's like fun, exciting, and obviously really draining to like keep learning the nuance of every industry you pitch for. And if you're in a massive agency, that's like a crazy loop. So with that in mind, it was like I discovered these new ideas and started to look back at experience. It was like, maybe there's something here where we could at least narrow our services to like pitch documentation or like the visual articulation of complicated ideas. And that was when I just like started thinking about how could I like attract people to that idea, or how could I like prove to the market that I had this skill. And that was kind of where the insight for visualized value came from. Is like, not everybody's gonna like get excited about a pitch deck about the supply chain company, right? Like, you post that up if you're a supply chain company, maybe that's interesting to you, but otherwise, like, how can you just communicate that you have this ability? So it's like, well, let's just find ideas that everybody can appreciate, or that are more widely recognizable and more widely applicable, let's say. So it could be, some business concept, some old Stoic philosophy, some, marketing principle. How can you visualize those as a way to explain the fact that you have that ability? So that was where visualized value was born. It was like, let's do this as a lead magnet for clients that we want to help make these like visual story deliverables for. And it just got some traction, just kept going after it, more and more and more content out on the front end. And it did attract some consulting clients, did a bunch of work. Some of it was like pitch work, but there's also people started to recognize the value of that in their marketing assets as well. It's like, I want to be able to explain. We get people like wealth managers and technology platforms that have really complex and like very hard to articulate ideas. Like, if you can put a visual to that, their customers are like, oh, okay, now, you're trying to deliver that epiphany a little bit more efficiently if you get a little visual together for it. So did some consulting work, then just the front end of visualized value got built up as a result of that. And then a couple of other things happened as a result of like building a consumer audience in commerce.
So when did it get to the point when you realized, like, there's always that pitch, that jumping off point, right? Where you say to yourself, because I didn't realize about your story. And that's why I always try to start with the story, because there's more nuance to figuring it out. It's not like one day you had an agency and you said, you know what, I have this skill, click, I'm going to productize this one very particular skill. Like, you presented an idea. Someone said, oh, that's kind of cool. Another person said, oh, that's kind of cool. You spoke to somebody that has like a, like you said, a real complicated service or a complicated product that you realized, I can sell this much more easily if I put a visualization behind it. So when did it get to the point where this agency / consulting / like front end kind of half service, half product thing turned into a full on, what visualized value is a brand and a membership, and like, I have my own thing now?
So I think there were a couple of moments or a couple of catalysts along the journey that like ticked it further and further towards that. The first, I think, is like building up the social accounts of the visualized value assets to like critical mass. So when you're at, and I don't remember exactly the amount, but a few thousand people, it's like, wow, there's something really here. And I think with a format like that, or with constraint like that, it's like, okay, so now really the limitation on growing this is me being creative enough to continue the series, right? Like, if I can continue to produce 5 or 6 of these a week, then the growth of this thing should continue. Like, you have an indication that the market's interested in it. Maybe that trend dies out at a certain point, who knows, but just keep making stuff. And I actually started to ask questions on the visualized value Instagram, just to the people that were consuming this stuff. It's like, everybody that appreciates this or is interested in this there's probably some common thread there, right? It's like, you found that a lot of people are trying to build businesses or work on themselves, or they're like interested in the characters that we're visualizing the thoughts of. So I was just like putting questions out to the audience, like, what do you need help with right now? what are you struggling with? What are the barriers that you're coming up against? A bunch of people was just like procrastination. I have all these ideas. I'm not implementing, the 21st century in a nutshell. I think it's just like people kind of consuming, but not putting anything back out. So was literally one morning, just had this idea. I was like, I've been using this like organization system for a while, like that I had made from a bunch of different like books and techniques, and just kind of taking the bits of it that work for me, like planning out the day, and here are the couple things I need to check off. It's like, I'll just formalize that into a product and offer it to the people that follow and visualize value. It was called the Daily Manifest.
Product.
Yeah, it's this PDF.
That checklist. Very cool.
Yeah. And that kind of, I mean, there was probably 2-3 months of just selling that. And I think we got it up to $19 maybe, with a community membership attached eventually. We didn't initially launch it with that, but I think the sort of light bulb went off when you get feedback from people that this is working, and they've like been able to see some traction in their personal life as a result of using this thing. It's like, what happens if we get the people that are all using this tool together? So, maybe they could talk about what worked for them, or they can give us more feedback on what they'd like to see. And like, there's just this, I think that's almost an accidental component of building a community that, like jives together. Is like they all have this one tool in common, or they have this one idea in common. And that was like, we did a WhatsApp group, then a Telegram group, then a Discord thing. I just jumped around all these different places and was sending emails to everybody in Shopify that had purchased it, like, join this thing, we're going to try and get it. It was like so informal and not really it wasn't even thinking about monetizing it at that point. Just like keep selling the PDF as like literally beer money at that point. It was like $100 a week or a couple $100 a week. And then eventually like started to just keep formalizing it. It got into Slack, and it's like, okay, let's make some channels and some structure. And we learned a lot more about the types of people that were in there. And then, then it became this thing where it's like, oh, we can really like start to build on this and offer these people that all have either similar goals or facing similar problems. Like, what resources can we build for people? So again, like put more fidelity and structure around the community itself, and then started to build like a resource library and do weekly calls where we just take input and questions from whatever people are doing. And I think the model of what we're building is interesting to people that are trying to get on that same trajectory of building things they're interested in and attracting similar people to support that pursuit. So from there, the membership, I mean, we were kind of playing with that for months and months. And then the next product after that was a training product, a course that was specific to the skill of visualizing value. So that was a response to seeing a lot of people in the market like emulating this stuff. It's like there's a Twitter profile popping up here, an Instagram profile popping up there. And it's like, okay, you could get angry about this and like start to like try and get people to one of the really interesting things was like I was getting tagged in stuff. It was like, have you seen this thing? Like, this is, a version of what you've been doing for X amount of time. And I was like, at first I was like, oh man, I'm like, game's up now, right? I'm just gonna be one of another 100 things. Yeah. And then it was like, well, hang on a minute. Maybe there's an opportunity to like just lean into the fact that people want to make this stuff. So let's make a product that explains the philosophy behind it and just put together a course that teaches people how to think about and execute like visualizing value. And that was like the impetus to move into like product outside of community. And I think that was like one of the bigger like upticks in the idea of like divorcing your time and income. The community is you still have a heavy time commitment, a reasonable amount of management to do there, and weekly calls, and like there's still responsibility, and still it's very enjoyable, but it's not the same mechanic as having a product that doesn't require you to be present to
Yeah.
deliver a result, right?
Yeah. 100%. Man, I'm so fascinated by that whole journey because so we talked a little bit before we started recording. My first real successful business. I had a bunch growing up, as I think a lot of people do, that failed. But the first one I made that really took off was an agency that's in a very, very specific industry. It's in addiction treatment, um, and I've spent a lot of time writing ridiculously detailed blog posts because I'm a writer. Like I always envy people like you who are really good at design. I just cannot do it. I can't even find my way through Canva. So I feel comfortable with the written word, but there's been a ton of times where I've thought to myself, man, how can I explain this in like a sentence as opposed to like a 3,000 word blog post? And I never even thought about the idea of not even a sentence, just like a visual card. Like, you want to know what we do? Here, look at this. Or better yet, it's not you want to know what we do, it's you want to know how this can help you, right?
Yeah.
Like, here, look at this, because this is the visualization of the value that we bring. So I think that's really fascinating. And this idea of like productizing yourself. There's another guy named Brian Cassell who I think is pretty cool. He did something very similar, except it's a lot more along the lines of actual like productizing a service,
Mm-hmm.
like just making your services like very cookie cutter, so they have more scalability. But I think your model is even more scalable because you're taking the shit that's in your head and you're creating a product out of it. And then that way, like if you build a big enough audience, you can just basically get out of the way, and the thing can take off for you. So um, I want to talk about that, man. There's just so many questions that I have for you because like I'm an admirer of your work. So let me get back to that one because there's a more specific question, and this is about your design style. Were you like, if I'm scrolling through Twitter or something and I see something that you make, I instantly know that it's yours. I wouldn't know exactly what the terminology is. I think it's like vector, right? Like you use a lot of lines and a lot of little dots, and I don't know how you came up with that. It seems like that was intentional. Like that was an intentional decision you made to create this, let's call it this vector style, and like make it yours. So I do want to come back and talk about this idea of like scalability, but I'm just dying to know, like from my own personal selfishness, like how did you come up with that idea? I think it's so cool.
So thank you first. I appreciate it. And the idea in retrospect, like analyzing that decision was, there's a Tim Ferriss idea. He says, make one decision to save yourself 1,000 decisions. I think as a designer, the possibility for you to waste hours on decisions like, what color is this going to be? What typefaces am I going to use? What like texture do I put behind this thing? Or how do I like source an image for this thing? So there's a couple of, I think, influential factors. One is like knowing that some of the most impactful things that I'd done in the past, like being in these presentation environments and selling work on the agency side, it's like the simplicity of some of those things. Like when you see people light up as a result of like, wow, like you can do something with 5 lines that can like completely change someone's perspective or like cement an idea in someone's head. So the simplicity component of it, I think, was always going to be a part of it. But the like stylistic restraint is like, it also forces you to be really creative. So if you say, I'm only allowed to use this tool, and this tool, and like you can throw any concept at these restraints, and then the onus is on you to figure out how to be creative to visualize it, right? It's like the creativity is born out of that restraint. I think if you have like, you give yourself more tools and more leeway, I don't think you necessarily grow as quickly as a creative as well, because you don't force yourself to adapt to the restrictions that you've put on yourself. It's like because meaning is such an important component of it, doesn't let you get away with like adding superfluous stuff in there. Right? Like every element on the page has to communicate something. How can you like best restrain yourself to that? Like, you know, you're only allowed to use vector shapes and this typeface. And then for the recognizability component, it's like just pattern interrupt and branding, right? Like every single time someone like yourself sees it, even if someone's imitating it, because we've been doing it for longer, I think it still grows the recognizability of visualized value. At least that's been the case so far.
Yeah, pattern interrupt. That's like a really good way to put it. It stops you from that regular thing that you're doing every day. And I love that idea of restraint. There's this idea that I've had. I can't remember where I learned it from. It's been years, and the idea is, if God can be everywhere, see everything, and do anything, what's the one thing that it lacks? And it's restraint, it's limitation. And it's the idea that like beauty is born in this idea of limitation. And so I totally, I created my blog, which is my brand, excuse me, completely white face, because I just like words, and I just like words on a page. And so I thought to myself, I don't need to have all these fancy designs. Like, this is my message, and I'm going to restrain myself in this way so that the content is the deliverable, as opposed to, like you said, like all the superfluous things that are coming around from the end. So I really love that, man.
Yeah, and we're just in a world of the superfluous right now as well, right?
Sure.
Just more and more noise every day. So anything I think you could do to break that seems to resonate with people. If you can, just it's like value per square inch. I like to think of it as well. It's like the density of message that you can like convey. Like that's really the measure of like great communication. I think how much you can say in the most condensed format, whether that's words or images or video, whatever it might be. It's about how much you can pack in.
And what I'll do is I'll take this one visual and I'll put it on the show notes of this post. But one of the ones that you did, what always stuck to me, is you have one line, and the line just goes up at a slight angle, and on that line there's two little dots, and that's one image. And then the other image, which is adjacent to it, is like a J-curve line. And every time the line breaks, you see these little dots. And it's basically everything that we talked about in the most simplistic visual viewpoint, where you only use like straight lines and dots, right? And it's like the message behind it is like, holy shit, most of us are here. Where if you take for people listening, go to the post and you can see it and you'll check it out. But if you take the line that grows statically, right, that grows linearly, and you take that your entire lifespan, okay, you had this entire lifespan and you grew like twice as much. But if you take this J-curve one, it's like, damn, you grew exponentially. And like that's your whole entire brand and messaging in two images that have nothing but lines and dots. Like that's so dope, man. For real, that's so sick.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and it's like I think to see people react to it just drives that like ambition to pack more and more meaning into it. And like just like having that, like there's a couple people reached out really early on and said like, oh, the image I saw of this, one example that sticks to my mind is like I was on a run, right? And I was about to like just start walking and give up. And then I don't even remember what quote it was, but there was a visual that was so simple that was, I think it was, there's a guy called I'm going to mispronounce his name. He's a personal trainer, Gregory Jersey, something like that. And he said, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. And it's just two lines going in different directions. And like that pops in your head when you're about to like slow down and go home and eat a bowl of Cheetos. Like, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to hit the rest of this run up. So like some of those ideas, being able to, like break through and interrupt the pattern of, I like to think if that was written above and visualized below, you have that much more, you have a higher chance of like transferring that idea to somebody if you put an extra layer of communication on there.
Totally agree. Yeah, like I could ride on this subject for a while just because it's difficult in the world that we live in to really separate yourself, where so much of what people say is basically just the same thing recycled, you know. And personally, like when people talk about originality and authenticity and stuff, I don't really know how I feel about that, because sometimes I think I like Seth Godin's line on that, like being authentic isn't actually the case, because like the authentic version of you would tell you that like I don't really feel like listening to your problems right now. Like what you want to do is you want to be professional, and the
Mm-hmm.
what a pro is somebody that like shows up and continues to show up and continues to show up. And when I look at the work that you do and I think about what it is that has made you really grow, I mean, like your brand is killing it, man. I don't know how long it's been, but what I've seen in the last 9 months is where like a big trajectory of your growth has been. And I think that's just been a I think the catalyst for that has been your like ability to execute, because like you continuously create and you continuously stick to your brand and you continuously execute on these really, really simple ideas that we've talked about. So yeah, let me stick on that one for a little bit. Is that innate to you? Is that like, do you come from a blue collar family? Is that like a personal decision that you've made to just show up every single day?
I think so. I mean, yeah, my parents are both in the military, and my dad's an engineer. My mum's a nurse. So
My mom was a nurse too.
yeah,
They're tough people.
unbelievable. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, I think even when I was a young kid, like I would take work just if I could get it. You know, like I was worked at like sweeping the floor at hairdressers, worked in an industrial shredder, worked like building sites, just any work I could get my hands on. And then when I realized like, oh my, someone's going to pay me to sit at a computer all day and like make stuff up, like, you know, draw stuff on a computer. It's like, you can make money doing that. I'm going to do this. Like just poured my energy into that. And I think, you know, there's also some like, I heard this term somewhere. Someone did a TED talk on this. It's like optimistic paranoia.
Mm.
Like people who have like a little bit of a, I definitely have a little bit of a there's a little bit of fear that drives the constant
I know
production.
exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah,
Optimistic
it's
paranoia.
totally not, yeah, it's totally not it's not uncomfortable necessarily, but it is like you wake up and you're like, man, I need to get something done today. Like if I'm like away from whatever I've been doing for 2 3 hours, I'm a little bit like, oh, I need to check on that, see how it's going. It's like, it's definitely not the most zen situation to be in a lot of the time, but I think it's responsible for, okay, I could like not do something today and not post something today, not write an email, blah blah, but tomorrow I'm going to wake up and be like, why the hell didn't I do that? And especially when you have, I think there's some perspective that I'm giving on that that's like maybe hard to understand when you don't have the machine that gives you that feedback so quickly. You know, like I was doing that for a couple of years before this, and it's so much harder to just do it into the void. When you have like, when you post something, you get like ding, 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 ding every time you post something. It's like that is a really easy thing to get into like an addiction loop of,
Mm.
almost, you know, like a positive addiction. So that's a real advantage when you get scale. Like I think I think it's called the Matthew principle. It's like the advantage keeps accruing to the person with the advantage,
Yeah.
and that, I mean, I recognize that is like an advantageous position to be in as well. But it is a result of, you know, just blasting stuff out for years and years and years, and then something takes hold eventually. But yeah, some like fear of not doing enough is always there. Like I think the agency culture breeds a little bit of that in you as well. It's like really feast famine, like pump stuff out, and like, yeah, I think it's just a like a kind of stressful, high frequency environment too. So you
Mhm.
just get that bred into you a little bit.
Yeah. It's so comforting to hear other people talk about that. So let me ask you this, like, do you get uncomfortable when you are trying to relax? You know, when you're like, I just need to
For
chill
sure.
out,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. No, I'm not good at relaxing. I'm terrible at relaxing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a couple of years ago when I was in the agency business, I would have found it much easier. But when you have this thing where it's like, you know, like you feel like you're sacrificing potential almost by not doing anything. And you have to get the balance right of like, if you're burning yourself out in service of, just hitting an arbitrary milestone, I don't think that's
Yeah.
helping you either. But for sure, it nags away at you, especially when you've kind of figured out some aspect of this exponential piece where it's like every time I'm not doing something, I'm sacrificing some sort of upside. You're
Mm.
not recognizing that, this vehicle that you've built, if you really, um, if you can be really conscious about the benefits of it, then it actually gives you more free time.
Yeah.
But it's hard to just keep your mind in the right place and do that sometimes. The
Yeah.
optimistic paranoia.
Man, totally. Like when you said that, I knew exactly what you meant, because for me, everyone who listens to my podcast know, like I've struggled with like real addictive tendencies for my entire life, and I've been able to hone that into entrepreneurship basically, which is why I feel so
Mm.
passionate about this, because it's like it gives me something to focus on, and it gives that little monster like a direction to look,
Yeah, yeah.
right, and think like this is something that I can give to the world as opposed to take from the world. And so I always feel this real sense of responsibility and this real sense of like I don't want to miss out. I don't want to look back and just feel so fucking stupid when I'm like, man, like I had the golden opportunity and I just didn't feel like doing it right then, because I told myself that I've been working so hard. And so like I wanted to go chill for a year, right? I'm
Yeah.
so afraid of that moment, like 10 years from now, where I could be like, oh God, like I feel so dumb. Like if I would have just kept going.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I relate to that for sure. Same narrative in my head for sure.
Yeah, great, man. Well, look, all right, let's start wrapping this thing up. You've been very, very gracious with your time, and I know everybody listening to this is going to get so much value from it. So, look, you're living, at least you're well on your way to living like this dream, right? You got the scalable, productized model, which, like you said, I've never heard Matthew's law. I always thought I can't remember the law where like the tallest trees get the most sun, which makes them grow the fastest.
Same idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
idea. And so you're at this real pinnacle point where I think a lot of people are looking up to you online, thinking like, man, how can I get to that spot? So you've told us your journey, you told us the steps that you took to get there, but for most of the people that are still at that beginner stage, or maybe they're not believing in themselves, or maybe they're thinking like, yeah, it worked for him, but it couldn't work for me. Like, what's the first step? Where do you start?
I think one of the ideas we talked about, restraint, to me is one of the most powerful ideas. And the idea of thinking in projects, like thinking in visualized value was never a business idea. It was like, how can I combine these things I'm interested in with this skill that I have? This is another thing we didn't get to, but I've been thinking a lot about how you improve a skill. And I think like some of the stuff we talked about, like positive addictions, is kind of combining something that you are irrationally interested in, or more interested in than the majority of people, that will drive you to produce. So I think that is like a really important thing to like, can you, regardless of the commercial application or what you deem to be the commercial application of something in the early stages, it's like, you just need to find something that you can get. Like, this may be, I don't know, like you need to be able to get addicted to producing work in the context of a project.
Yeah.
That to me feels like the advantage that I've had in this situation, is like the complementary nature of like a bunch of skills that I didn't really think I was like gonna use again, or were like only useful in this context. Like these weird combinations of things that give you some way to continually express yourself. And I think when you talked about putting something else back into the world as a product of this like nagging thing you have in the back of your head, that to me is really what I'm trying to do, is like leverage this thing that I got reasonably good at over a course of like, you know, years and different experiences and blah, 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 and combine that with like the ideas that actually help me grow as a person, merge those things together and like use that to consistently publish. And like, I'm not sure the readership or the listenership of the podcast, but I think regardless of what you do for a living, because this advice always comes off as like, I'm not a designer, or I'm not a video editor, or I don't have a, you know, I don't have some tangible skill. I think regardless of that, like there is a way for you to overlay those two things, like think something that you have accrued as a skill and something that you're interested in personally, find a way to take that to more people. That to me is like where this came from. And there's one other idea I think that was pretty influential in the growth of Visualized Value early on, and it's like retroactively been coined the permissionless apprenticeship. So there are people out there who have these really well-formed thoughts and well-articulated ideas, maybe even businesses they've built, and you can like work for them without permission. So that's what I was doing for the first 3 months, like Naval's ideas. Like I was obsessed with the way these things were articulated. So how can I add my additional context to that, put it back out into the world as a thank you for what you've taught me? And that, you know, like that ability to bleed into other people's networks by just doing things for them has been just enormous as well. And I think that the agency owners are really interesting. And looking back, I was in the same situation where instead of making something and putting it out, I would just try and win new business so I could make something. So I spend so much time focusing on trying to get new business. And if I'd have just translated that to like building something and sending it to someone and say, hey, can I essentially put your name on this and you can buy it from me? That is like the shift in thinking where you can create demand for something that you're interested in doing versus just, hey, I'm a marketing agency who needs marketing work doing. Yeah. So really like bizarre, I don't know, a tendency that like you get this blindness as a practitioner that you don't want to do any work until someone signed a contract with you or like agreed to work with you. But the work is the thing that people get interested in. So it's like find a way to do the work first in a way that you're interested in it. And that will generate the demand that allows you to actually execute within like within the boundaries and the restraints that you set. Like if someone wants to work with Visualized Value as a consulting client, like they've already qualified themselves. They want what we're doing. Like they're not going to come in and say, hey, can you actually like, I want that color and I want this, you know, this photo in the background. It's like, no, like you self-selected based on the work that we're putting out into the world. That completely changed the trajectory of the business. So that was a very rambling answer. Hopefully there was something in there.
Though, man. And like, this is usually where I just say like, oh, wow, cool. Great to have you, because I like the guest to finish, but I just have to comment on it because you talked about two things and they sound very complex, but as somebody that knows exactly what you're talking about, I think I can relate to you in a way that hopefully simplifies it. The one where you talked about like getting addicted to that loop, right? There has to be a reason behind doing it, because in the beginning, no one's paying you to do it. And this is this idea people talk about like purpose. And I think this concept gets a little bit woo-wooed. I always see it from a very practical standpoint. If you don't have a reason to do it, you're not going to do it. And like, that's just very simple. Like if there's not why would anybody do some shit that they hate doing with no reason?
Right.
Just would never do it. Right.
Yeah.
So you have to align that. And then on the second standpoint where you talked about like giving back, my experience was very similar. I built, I own a pretty large website called Sober Nation. It's a big media site for people that are in recovery. And awesome. I got the idea to do it from a guy named Brian Clark. He was the founder of a website called Copy Blogger. And it's probably the largest website in the world for copywriting and like online written word marketing. And That's exactly what I did. I honestly like approached my blogs as a way to pay homage to Brian. And I never met the guy before,
Mm.
because he was basically doing that. His work wasn't a thing to get paid for. His work was a thing to give to the world. It's like he reversed the cycle. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
and so I just took the same exact approach. And now, you know, 10 years later, after all that and all that experience, I'm actually a partner in that website in Copyblogger. So it's like,
Awesome.
it's not just like, it's not just a bunch of nonsense that you say on podcasts to sound deep. Like
No,
it really is,
no.
it's a shift in thinking, you know what I mean? And you have to invest in yourself. And you've done that, bro. And like, I'm really, really grateful to talk to you. Thank you.
I love the conversation, man. Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, I could do another hour on this. There's so much to unpack about
Yeah,
the yeah, but that's, I mean, it's just great to hear that that same mechanic has had, you know, the same effect essentially. Like
hmm,
regardless of the subject matter, it's about the way you think about it and the faith you have in like
yeah,
continuing to produce this stuff because it matters to you,
for
and
sure.
it comes back around eventually.
Yeah, agree totally. Man, Jack, thank you so much again for your time. I really love talking to you. I really hope we stay in touch. You're on Twitter, Jack Butcher,
Yep.
visualizevalue.com. All of it's going to be linked in the show notes. Anywhere else people can find you?
That's it. No, you'll find everything there. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks again, man. Really, really had a great time talking to you. Let's do this again.
Me too, mate. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Jack.